Representative Ilhan Omar thought her political shield was permanently impenetrable, but a single viral microphone moment just unleashed a catastrophic federal reckoning that will change Washington forever. She is described as a walking betrayal of the American Republic, a political fraud who swore an oath to the Constitution only to subvert it, bleed the taxpayer dry, and then arrogantly brag about her foreign allegiance on live television. But arrogant political actors always get high on their own hubris. America is currently standing at the edge of a demographic and ideological precipice. A nation is not simply a collection of greeting, card poems, or nice words read off a teleprompter. The people are the nation. The foundational concept of the American melting pot relies entirely on the willingness of its inhabitants to actually melt together, to share a unified allegiance to the red, white, and blue. But what happens when the very politicians elected to protect this republic view the host country with unapologetic disdain? What happens when a sitting member of the United States Congress openly orchestrates a cultural subversion from within, treating her sworn oath to the Constitution as nothing more than an inconvenient stepping stone? The answer to that question begins on a crisp afternoon in Washington, D.C., during an outdoor press junction that was supposed to be just another stroke to Ilhan Omar's political ego. The air was thick with the suffocating humidity typical of the Beltway, but the real stench came from the podium. A partisan crowd of aides and political sycophants had been bussed in, clapping on cue and holding up glossy, pre-printed signs. Surrounded by a forest of microphones and the flashing bulbs of an overly sympathetic mainstream press corps, Representative Ilhan Omar is holding court. She stands at the podium, projecting an aura of supreme, unbothered arrogance. She believes she is untouchable, fully insulated by the protective shield of the radical left. Instead of addressing the pressing domestic crisis devastating American citizens, she uses the national platform to unabashedly flaunt her foreign allegiance. Speaking with a chilling level of pride, she declares on camera that she is a Somali girl. She does not consider herself an American who happens to have been born elsewhere. Her primary identity, her true loyalty, is firmly anchored to the Horn of Africa. She leans into the microphones, her tone dripping with a bizarre, almost hypnotic nostalgia. "I am a girl with your lineage, your religion," she preached to her targeted audience, her voice echoing loudly over the public address system. "I was taken from Somalia. I want to live there," she announces smoothly. She goes further, detailing a vision that fundamentally betrays her current office, stating she is hopeful that she and her children will one day return to raise their kids in Somalia. But the brazen disrespect does not stop there. Emboldened by the clicking cameras and the silent complicity of the reporters, she pivots to her shady, deeply inappropriate diplomatic ties. With a giant, gleeful grin on her face, she boasts about her recent conversations with the Somali president. "The president of Somalia is our president," she projected, soaking in the cheering of her loyalists. "Welcome home. Our home is your home." To Omar, a sitting United States lawmaker, the foreign head of state isn't a diplomatic counterpart, he is family, he is our president, she proclaims to the crowd. She proudly details their cozy, highly irregular relationship, bragging that she affectionately calls him her uncle and that he refers to her as his girl. This is not just poor optics, it is a grotesque display of dual loyalty broadcast on national television. Suddenly, the temperature in the courtyard drops. The rehearsed political theater is violently derailed when a young, sharp-eyed American reporter, one not on the approved list of media sycophants, shoves his way to the front of the barricade. He doesn't offer pleasantries or softball setups, he attacks the narrative head-on. He doesn't wait for a polite nod from her press secretary. "Congresswoman," his voice booms over the murmurs of the crowd, "what about the American people who are wondering how you made such a mess? Explain to the American people what the explanation is." Thrusting his microphone forward, he fires a rapid-fire, razor-sharp question directly confronting Omar about the swirling rumors, the systemic exploitation of the American immigration system, the alleged frauds, and how exactly she intends to serve a nation she so openly wishes to abandon. The transformation is instantaneous. The charming, grinning facade shatters into a million pieces. "I have given them the explanation," Omar hissed, her mask completely slipping. "Do you want to tell our viewers?" The reporter pressed relentlessly. Omar's psychological armor cracks under the sudden, intense pressure of genuine accountability. The unbothered arrogance mutates into unhinged, defensive aggression. Her eyes narrow into a cold, venomous glare, locking dead onto the young reporter. Instead of answering the question, instead of deflecting with standard political rhetoric, she completely loses control. She leans aggressively into the microphone, her voice laced with unfiltered contempt, and delivers a vulgar, chilling warning designed to intimidate the press into submission. "You don't know Jack. How about that? Okay, have a good day. Thank you," she spat out sarcastically, dripping with venom. With that crude dismissal hanging heavily in the air, she turns on her heel and storms away, leaving the press corps in stunned silence. She thought the intimidation tactic would work. She thought her aggressive posturing would bury the footage. She was dead wrong. Within minutes, the raw, unedited clip hits the internet. It doesn't just trend, it detonates. It becomes a viral bombshell, tearing through social media platforms and igniting a massive, uncontrollable wave of public outrage. Millions of everyday Americans watch a United States representative tell them directly to their faces that her true home, her true president, and her true loyalties lie thousands of miles away. The hypocrisy of the left is laid bare for the entire world to see. Hundreds of miles away, deep inside the West Wing of the White House, the atmosphere is deathly quiet. Vice President J.D. Vance sits at the head of a heavy mahogany conference table, his eyes locked onto a secure flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall. The viral clip plays one final time. "You don't know Jack," echoes through the quiet room. Vance reaches out and hits the pause button, freezing Omar's contorted, furious face on the screen. A cold, calculated glint flashes in his eyes. He doesn't yell, he doesn't rage. He simply recognizes the catastrophic tactical error the Congresswoman has just made. This wasn't just a public relations disaster, it was the ultimate undeniable proof of her ideological treachery. For months, the Trump administration had been quietly building an airtight legal and investigative framework in the shadows, tracing the dark money, tracking the immigration fraud, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Vance leans back in his leather chair, a predator watching the trap finally spring shut. The viral explosion has just handed them the exact political capital they needed. This is the spark. The covert phase of the investigation is over. It is time to bring the hammer down, and the arena for this reckoning will be Capitol Hill. The heavy oak doors of the House Oversight Committee room swing shut with a hollow thud, instantly severing the deafening roar of the protests and the chaotic media circus raging outside. Inside, the air is stifling, thick with the suffocating tension that precedes a violent storm. The viral outrage of the courtyard has been replaced by the cold, clinical, and unforgiving reality of a congressional subpoena. The room is entirely cut off from the outside world. This is no longer a public relations crisis. It is a legal reckoning waiting to happen. The gallery is packed, shoulder to shoulder, divided by a palpable ideological fault line. To the left, Democratic loyalists and sympathetic journalists sit with their notebooks ready, preparing to spin the upcoming hours into a narrative of right-wing bullying and political martyrdom. To the right, Republican lawmakers and conservative legal aides wait with the quiet, disciplined patience of a tribunal. Above them all, the red recording lights of the live broadcast cameras burn like predatory eyes locked onto the center of the room. The side door opens, Representative Ilhan Omar walks in. She does not look like a politician caught in the crosshairs of a federal investigation. Instead, she projects a masterclass in absolute defiance. Her posture is rigid, her chin tilted upward. She delivers an unbothered, almost bored performance for the cameras. Taking her seat at the solitary witness table, she adjusts the microphone with slow, deliberate grace, making sure the world sees that she is entirely unfazed by the spectacle. She wears a mask of supreme confidence, heavily insulated by the belief that her progressive shield and media allies make her untouchable. But across the room, sitting dead center at the chairman's dais, Vice President J.D. Vance is not playing to the gallery. He isn't holding a sheet of partisan talking points or printed political rhetoric. Spread out before him are thick, heavily redacted dossiers, stacks of financial ledgers, immigration records, and personal histories that the Department of Justice has spent months meticulously assembling. He doesn't look at the camera as he watches her perform with a clinical, unblinking focus. Vance leans forward. He doesn't bang the gavel to demand order. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. When he speaks, his tone is freezing, cutting straight through the anxious murmurs in the room. Representative Omar, we are not here today for a press conference, and we are certainly not here for a cable news debate. Omar crosses her arms, flashing a cynical smirk. She casts a slow, disdainful glance across the Republican bloc, rolling her eyes slightly. She is clearly treating the hearing as nothing more than cheap right-wing political theater. I am fully aware of where I am, Mr. Vice President, Omar replies, her voice dripping with practiced condescension. She leans into the microphone, instantly launching into her defensive talking points. I am sitting in the middle of a partisan witch hunt. This is a manufactured spectacle designed to distract the American people from your administration. Xenophobia. You don't like that a Somali immigrant holds power, so you drag me in here to appease your base. Let's just get this over with. Vance doesn't take the bait. He doesn't argue about her political victimhood or engage with the accusations of xenophobia. He completely ignores the political noise and zeroes in on the legal trap. You can spin this however you like for your donors, Congresswoman, Vance states, his voice perfectly level but carrying immense weight. He taps his index finger firmly against the thickest file on his desk. But in this room, this is a formal congressional inquiry backed by federal law. Before I ask my first question, I am going to establish the ground rules very clearly. This is not a venue for political maneuvering. You are seated before this committee under federal subpoena. He pauses, letting the silence hang heavily over the room to ensure the audience at home grasps the severity of the moment. Do you understand? Vance continues, his gaze locking onto hers, refusing to let her look away, that every single statement you make today is being entered into the official congressional record, and that any false statement, omission of fact, or deliberate misdirection provided to this committee is a direct violation of Title 18, Section 1001 of the United States Code. The room goes dead silent. The clicking of the cameras suddenly sounds deafening. The Democratic aides in the front row shift uncomfortably in their seats. This isn't a standard political opening statement where politicians yell over each other for sound bites. Vance is methodically reading her rights. Are you trying to threaten me, JD? Omar shoots back, dropping his title to assert dominance, her smirk hardening into a defensive scowl. Because I don't intimidate easily. I am reading you the law, Representative. Vance fires back instantly, the words snapping like a whip, leaving no room for her to breathe. I am informing you that the protective shield of your office ends at that witness table. If you lie to the press outside, you get a bad news cycle. But if you lie to this committee today regarding your personal, financial, and immigration history, you will be referred directly to the Department of Justice for criminal perjury. Vance leans closer to his microphone, his voice dropping to a deadly serious register. I am not asking for a political speech. I am asking you to confirm on the record, do you understand the severe legal jeopardy you are in right now? A simple yes or no will suffice. Omar stares at him for a fraction of a second. The mask of her unbothered confidence flickers. The realization hits her. Vance isn't trying to score a viral moment for conservative media. He is laying the concrete foundation for a federal indictment. But her pride, and the cameras watching her every move, won't let her back down. She leans forward, gripping the edges of the table, her voice laced with arrogant defiance. Yes, I understand perfectly. Ask your questions. Vance nods slowly, a chilling calmness settling over his features. He opens the first dossier. The trap is set, the door is locked, there is nowhere left for her to run. The massive flat screens flanking the committee room flared to life. Suddenly, the oppressive silence of the chamber was shattered by her own voice, echoing from the viral clip. There she was, 10 feet tall, and in high definition, grinning like a sweepstakes winner as she fawned over a foreign head of state. Vance forced her to sit there and watch herself pledge emotional and political fealty to a foreign government. It is a spectacular irony of modern American politics, watching a woman who clawed her way into the epicenter of American power use a taxpayer-funded megaphone to declare how much she misses a country she fled. The screens faded to black. The room was dead silent again. Vance leaned into his microphone. "Representative Omar," he began, his voice devoid of the righteous theatrical anger that usually fuels Capitol Hill sound bites. He was surgical. "You sit in the United States Congress. You draw a taxpayer salary. You vote on legislation that impacts the lives of 330 million Americans. Yet you stand in front of a camera and declare that Somalia is superior to the United States of America." He paused, letting the sheer absurdity of the statement marinate in the quiet room. "You look at a nation that currently lacks the basic technological capacity to stop piracy off its own coastline, a nation plagued by systemic collapse, and you hold it up as the gold standard. You proudly look at their leader and declare he is our president, so I want you to explain the logic to this committee without the political talking points. On what factual grounds do you declare a failed state superior to the nation that gave you asylum, funded your education, and handed you the most immense political privilege on the planet?" Omar didn't flinch. If there is one thing the progressive left has mastered, it is the art of weaponizing victimhood while maintaining a posture of absolute moral superiority. She leaned forward, eyes blazing, instantly retreating to the safest, most well-worn bunker in modern politics: identity politics. "This whole proceeding is a farce," Omar fired back, her voice ringing with practiced righteous indignation. She was entirely ignoring the substantive question about her own words, opting instead to burn down the room. "You want to talk about superiority? Mr. Vice President, let's talk about your administration. Let's talk about Donald Trump. The man is an authoritarian. He is an extremist who needs to be impeached. And this entire committee is nothing more than an exercise in blatant systemic racism designed to terrorize immigrants." She was on a roll now, hitting every progressive buzzword with the precision of a metronome. "Somali Americans have always been the fabric of America. We are the backbone of this nation's diversity. You are terrified of a strong immigrant woman of color who refuses to bow down to a nationalist agenda. You don't care about the truth. You only care about erasing us." Watching Ilhan Omar defend her patriotism is like watching an arsonist give a lecture on fire safety. It is an insult to the intelligence of everyone in the room, and Vance did absolutely nothing. He sat in his chair, completely motionless, his expression unreadable. He didn't bang the gavel. He didn't interrupt to defend the president or the Republican Party. He just let her talk. He gave her the floor to exhaust her ideological ammunition. The press gallery predictably ate it up. The frantic clatter of laptop keyboards echoed through the chamber like a swarm of locusts as journalists scrambled to type out tomorrow's headline bait. Omar stands defiant against GOP inquisition. The Democrats on the committee exchanged smug, self-satisfied nods. They thought she had done it. They thought she had successfully flipped the script, hijacked the narrative, and taken control of the room. But in the cynical theater of Washington, he who speaks longest usually loses. It was a psychological trap, brilliant in its simplicity. Vance was purposefully letting her climb to the absolute peak of her own smugness, waiting patiently for her to tie the proverbial knot before he kicked the ladder out from under her. As the last echoes of her progressive sermon bounced off the mahogany walls, a sudden, violent crack jolted the room. It wasn't the gavel. It was the deafening smack of a 3-inch thick binder of financial disclosures slamming onto the chairman's desk. Vice President J.D. Vance didn't flinch at her slurs. He bypassed the emotional bait entirely, refusing to let her play the victim. "That was a beautiful speech, Congresswoman. Very poetic," Vance said, his voice laced with a lethal dose of sarcasm. "Now let us talk about something a little more tangible than your feelings. Let's talk about math." He cracked the binder open, his eyes fixed on the numbers. While everyday Americans out in the heartland are getting their bank accounts squeezed by inflation, while the working class is choosing between buying groceries or filling up their gas tanks, your household seems to have discovered a financial miracle. According to your original financial disclosure, your husband S company inexplicably skyrocketed to a valuation of $30 million. Yet magically, just last month in April, right as federal scrutiny started heating up, you filed an urgent amendment. Suddenly, poof, that $30 million evaporated into thin air, adjusted down to a meager $95,000. The press gallery erupted into a chaotic buzz. The frantic clicking of cameras accelerated. Democratic aides sitting behind Omar started aggressively whispering to one another, scrambling on their phones. The noise in the chamber was instantly dialing up, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Omar's mask of righteous indignation slipped. She leaned forward, grabbing her microphone, her knuckles turning white as she tried to shout over the rising murmur of the crowd. "That was merely an accounting error," Omar stammered, her previous eloquence completely vanishing. "A clerical mistake by our filing team. I am not a millionaire, and your attempt to weaponize a simple paperwork glitch is pathetic." "An accounting error?" Vance chuckled, though there was zero humor in his eyes. He leaned into his mic, raising his voice to cut through the mounting uproar. "A $29.9 million glitch? When a blue-collar plumber in Ohio forgets to report $600 on Venmo, the IRS kicks his door down and ruins his life. But when a sitting Congresswoman misplaces $30 million, we are supposed to believe her accountant's calculator just ran out of batteries?" The Republican side of the aisle erupted into jeers and applause. The room was spiraling out of the Democrats' control. "Let's contextualize this multi-million-dollar glitch alongside the company you keep back in Minnesota," Vance pressed on, turning into a relentless interrogator. "Let's talk about the feeding. Our future syndicate, let's talk about how the very people you just claimed are the fabric of America perpetrated one of the largest fraud schemes in United States history." Omar's eyes widened in sheer panic. "Mr. Vice President, you are conflating." "I am speaking, Representative," Vance barked, his voice booming over the sound system, shutting her down completely. "Your network didn't just bend the rules, they shattered them. We are looking at hundreds of millions in taxpayer dollars, money explicitly meant to feed starving children, funneled right out the back door of your district. We have the receipts on your constituents. We have one particular individual who received millions of dollars from the federal government for supposedly taking care of one single elderly man. Millions of dollars stolen from the American taxpayer, paid out as a service for securing one man. The hearing room was in total bedlam now. Reporters were practically shouting into their recorders, and lawmakers were openly arguing across the aisle. Omar frantically hammered the button on her mic, her voice cracking as she stumbled over her own defense. "I cannot be held responsible for the criminal actions of isolated individuals in my district," she yelled, visibly sweating, frantically waving her hands to distance herself from the radioactive fallout. "You are twisting the facts. I have no direct ties to those defendants, and to suggest otherwise is an absolute outrage. You are trying to trap me. The only trap here is the one you built for yourself," Vance fired back, his logic operating like a merciless machine. "The outrage is that you sit here lecturing us about the moral superiority of a foreign land while your political machine operates like an organized crime syndicate on American soil. You want to talk about social structure. Your structure is built on defrauding the very taxpayers you openly despise. These aren't isolated incidents. Congresswoman, they are total crooks. They are thieves, and you are sitting right in the middle of the blast zone." The echo of Vance calling her network a syndicate of thieves had barely faded in the chamber when he abruptly shifted gears. He didn't give her a single second to catch her breath or spin a new web of political victimhood. With calculated precision, he tossed the massive financial ledger aside and slid a much thinner, far more dangerous manila folder into the center of his desk, the immigration file. "You claim you can control the criminals operating within your district," Vance said, his voice dropping into a razor-sharp conversational register that was infinitely more terrifying than a shout. "Fine, let us leave your associates out of it. Let us talk about a subject where you are the sole architect. Let us talk about exactly who you married." Omar's jaw tightened. The color visibly drained from her face, leaving a pale, ashen panic in its wake. Vance opened the folder, his eyes scanning the documents before locking dead onto hers. Let's bring this down to reality for the people watching at home. Every year, thousands of law-abiding American citizens fall in love with foreign nationals. They spend years navigating a grueling, expensive immigration bureaucracy. They drain their savings to pay legal fees. They submit thousands of pages of private text messages, and they sit through intense federal interrogations just to prove to the government that their marriage is genuine. They respect the system. But your personal timeline, Congresswoman, treats United States immigration law like a cheap bureaucratic loophole. He didn't raise his voice. He just increased the speed and intensity of his delivery, dealing direct damage with every word. Let's look at the documented timeline. In 2002, you entered into a religious marriage, yet without ever legally dissolving that union, you somehow entered into a formal civil marriage in 2009. Two overlapping marriages, and who was the lucky groom in 2009? A man named Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi. Vance paused, letting the name hang in the suffocating air of the committee room like a drawn blade. A man who multiple reports and investigations suggest is your own biological brother, the chamber gasped. The frantic typing of the press corps abruptly stopped. Vance leaned over the dais, his gaze unrelenting. When the American people read these things about you, about who you married, whether you married this person or that person, it seems something is very fishy there, so let's clear it up right here, right now. Omar's psychological mask shattered completely. The polished, arrogant politician who had walked into the room demanding respect was gone. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, frantically searching for an exit that didn't exist. Her hands, previously gesturing with such righteous progressive authority, were now clamped onto the edges of the witness table, so hard her knuckles were bone white. She was suffocating under the weight of her own paper trail. I reminded you of Title 18, Section 1001, at the very beginning of this hearing, Vance said, the perjury trap finally springing shut with a lethal snap. I am going to ask you a very simple, direct question. You will answer yes or no. Do you swear under penalty of federal perjury that your 2009 legal marriage to Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi was a legitimate marital union and absolutely not a criminal conspiracy to defraud the United States government for a green card? The broadcast camera zoomed in tight on her face. Millions of Americans were watching in real time, waiting for the righteous defender of the fabric of America to defend herself. She opened her mouth, but the arrogant words failed her. The linguistic acrobatics collapsed under the brutal weight of a binary, legally binding question. My personal life, she stammered, her voice shaking violently, completely stripped of its former bravado. My family, I invoke my right to privacy. I will not subject my private life to this right-wing harassment. She refused to say yes, she refused to say no. In the brutal, unforgiving arena of politics and law, claiming privacy, when asked a direct question about federal fraud, is a deafening confession. Vance didn't need to push her to speak further. The high-definition cameras caught the thick bead of cold sweat rolling down her forehead. Her evasive, stammering refusal was broadcast into living rooms from coast to coast, serving as an airtight, undeniable admission of guilt to the entire country. Privacy. The word hung in the stifling air of the committee room, a pathetic see-through shield made of wet paper. In the brutal theater of Washington, a non-answer Omar's refusal to answer didn't command the silence she desperately wanted. Instead, it poured gasoline on a smoldering fire. A low, venomous hiss of whispers instantly swept through the press gallery. Journalists who had spent the last hour vigorously defending her honor were now pointing, murmuring, and frantically texting their editors. The protective bubble of the progressive media was violently popping in real time. She opened her mouth, her voice cracking, completely losing the measured cadence of a seasoned politician. You have no right to pry into. I don't need to pry, Congresswoman. Vance cut her off, his voice eerily calm, possessing the cold inevitability of a final judgment dropping. He didn't yell, he didn't need to. He reached beneath the dais and produced a single thin folder, its cover stamped with the heavy, unmistakable seal of the United States Department of Justice. Let me elevate this conversation from the gutter of your personal excuses to the absolute bedrock of American law, Vance began, holding the document by its corner. He was speaking to her, but his words were precision engineered for the millions watching at home, moving seamlessly from the philosophical to the devastatingly concrete. Citizenship, Representative Omar, is the most sacred, binding contract this republic can offer. It is not a hotel loyalty program. It is not a bureaucratic timeshare you can scam your way into with forged documents and fake marriages. The American people are the most generous on the face of the earth. We open our doors to the world, but when an individual stands before a federal judge, raises their right hand, and swears a solemn oath to the United States, while actively conspiring to defraud that very nation, the contract is null and void. A house built on perjury is a house that federal law will tear down to the foundation. He slapped the Department of Justice file onto the table. The sound cracked like a gunshot. You thought this hearing was just a partisan exercise. You thought you could come in here, throw around the word racism, and walk out a martyr, but the Department of Justice doesn't care about your social media followers. I am holding a classified briefing from the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security, and they have officially informed this committee that this administration is currently pursuing the highest volume of denaturalization referrals in American history. Omar's breath hitched visibly. Her hands, previously gripping the table, began to tremble uncontrollably. Vance leaned all the way forward, his eyes locking onto hers with a predatory, unrelenting focus. He was delivering the decisive blow. They are actively looking at hundreds of individuals who weaponized our generosity, lied on their forms, and defrauded their way into American citizenship to strip them of that privilege, and as of this morning, various members of this administration have confirmed to me that your name is sitting at the very center of that dragnet. He paused for a fraction of a second, letting the absolute terror wash over her. You are officially under federal investigation for committing severe, systemic levels of immigration fraud. The Department of Justice is coming for your citizenship, Congresswoman. The room did not just buzz, it detonated. The suffocating tension instantly shattered into pure, unadulterated chaos. Dozens of journalists vaulted out of their seats, shouting over one another in a frantic frenzy. A blinding strobe light storm of camera flashes erupted from the gallery, turning the mahogany-paneled room completely white. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle were on their feet, the Democrats paralyzed in shock, while the Republicans watched the implosion of their greatest adversary through the blinding flashbulbs. The cameras captured the absolute destruction of Ilhan Omar. The unbothered arrogance that she had paraded into the room was entirely gone. The woman who had proudly laughed about her uncle in Somalia had physically collapsed into herself. She was shrinking into her large leather chair, her shoulders hunched, her eyes wide, glassy, and completely vacant. She was visibly shaking, utterly terrified, trapped in the inescapable glare of a legal reckoning that was about to strip away everything she had built. The chaos in the room was absolute, a wall of shouting voices, frantic murmurs, and relentless camera flashes. Ilhan Omar sat paralyzed at the witness table, her progressive empire reduced to ashes under the weight of a federal criminal probe. But the Republican side of the dais was not finished. They were not just going to destroy her political career, they were going to ensure no one like her could ever exploit the American system again. Vice President J.D. Vance leaned into his microphone, his voice slicing cleanly through the pandemonium. Order in this committee. I yield the remainder of my time to Representative Nancy Mace. Representative Mace stood up abruptly. She didn't look at the press gallery. She didn't look at the cameras. She looked directly at Omar. When she spoke, her voice was a cold, clinical hammer of legislative reality, devoid of any theatrical metaphors. She was delivering a direct, fatal blow to her career. Look at the witness table, everyone, Mace demanded, her voice echoing powerfully across the room and forcing a sudden hush over the crowd. We are watching the real-time consequences of allowing divided loyalties into the highest levels of the United States government. Representative Omar has openly put Somalia's interests first. That is not loyalty to America. You cannot swear a sacred oath to defend the United States Constitution while actively yearning to build a future in a foreign nation. Mace held up a thick stack of freshly printed legislative documents, slamming them onto the desk in front of her. We are not going to wait for the Department of Justice to clean up this disaster. We are going to permanently fix the law, Mace declared, her tone sharp and unyielding. Today, I am officially introducing a joint resolution for a constitutional amendment that will permanently bar foreign-born individuals from serving in the United States Congress. My bill is simple, and it is absolute. To serve in Congress, you must be a citizen of the United States only. A wave of shock rippled through the press corps, but Mace spoke louder, driving the legal and constitutional argument home with brutal clarity. There is no room for divided hearts in this chamber. No foreign passports, no dual allegiances. You cannot legislate the future of 330 million Americans if you hold an emergency exit visa in your back pocket. If you want to pledge your loyalty to another president, you have every right to do so, but you will do it on their soil, not on our taxpayer dime. Before Omar could even attempt to reach for her microphone to mount a defense, Representative Randy Fine seized the floor, delivering the final devastating strike to the progressive bloc. I fully back this resolution, Fine stated, his tone uncompromising, stripping away any remaining political pleasantries. To hold office in this republic, you must be unconditionally American, no foreigners in office. The rule moving forward is non-negotiable. If you are a dual citizen, you have to give up your citizenship in the other country and completely renounce it. We are done playing games with politicians who view the United States as an economic host rather than a sovereign nation. The legislative trap had officially snapped shut, forming a tight, inescapable perimeter around Omar's political survival. The live broadcast cameras instantly panned to the Democratic side of the aisle. The progressive lawmakers who had spent years aggressively defending Omar, who had championed her as the ultimate untouchable symbol of diversity, were completely paralyzed. They sat frozen in their heavy leather chairs, eyes downcast, nervously shuffling their papers. Not a single one of them reached for their microphone, not a single one dared to speak up in her defense. The Democrats realized with terrifying clarity that defending a woman currently facing the highest volume of denaturalization referrals in history for immigration fraud would be absolute political ruin. Omar was entirely isolated, cut off from her allies, abandoned by her party, and legally cornered with absolutely no way out. The absolute silence from the left side of the aisle was deafening. The progressive champions, who usually shouted the loudest for the cameras, were now entirely mute, pinned down by the devastating reality of the legislative wall that had just been built around them. Vice President J.D. Vance did not let that silence linger. Seizing complete and uncontested control of the boiling room, he turned his attention away from the trembling Congresswoman and directed his focus straight into the broadcast cameras. He was no longer just prosecuting Ilhan Omar, he was delivering a sweeping, systemic indictment against the entire ideological foundation of her political enablers. This was never just about one fraudulent marriage or a few falsified tax documents, Vance announced, his voice carrying the heavy, authoritative weight of a final verdict. Representative Omar is merely a symptom of a much darker, much more cynical disease that has infected our political system. While her colleagues sit there staring at their shoes, let's explain to the American people exactly why they fought so desperately to protect her, and why they look the other way while our institutions are pillaged. He leaned over the dais, breaking down the macro-level political strategy with surgical precision. He was translating the abstract theories of Washington into the concrete, devastating reality facing everyday Americans. What we are looking at is a calculated operation of demographic engineering, Vance stated, his logic methodical and unyielding. This is not about the American dream, this is about power. When states like Minnesota were swinging too far to the right, the political establishment didn't try to win over the voters with better arguments or better policies. They decided to rig the game. They needed to import a completely new population to deliberately displace the native populations of Minnesota. He pointed a finger toward the empty, defensive stares of the Democratic lawmakers. The goal was never assimilation. The goal was to manufacture a permanent Democrat bloc. You bypass the will of the American citizen by importing a constituency that will keep you in power forever. Representative Omar and her associates weren't organically elected by a unified American community. They were airdropped here by leaders who wished to use them to alter states like Minnesota. The room sat completely spellbound. The press corps, previously ready to riot, was now utterly transfixed by the sheer, unfiltered brutality of the truth being laid out on national television. But let's look at what this grand globalist experiment actually delivered to the taxpayers, Vance continued, his tone hardening into absolute disgust. He refused to use polite, bureaucratic euphemisms to describe the financial rot. He went straight for the core issue. In exchange for this manufactured voting bloc, the American people were handed a syndicate of total parasites. We are done calling these people misguided organizers or community activists. They are crooks. They are thieves. The political machine that put you in this chair, Congresswoman, is deeply corrupt. Vance's words were no longer just statements. They were sledgehammers, methodically smashing the pillars of the progressive facade. You thought you could bleed the American taxpayer dry to fund your own radical anti-American empires, but that ends today. We got them, and now we are putting the clamps on this administration, is tearing your fraudulent network out by the roots, and we are shutting off the vault. Before the eyes of tens of millions of Americans watching live, the illusion of the invincible progressive empire completely collapsed. The moral superiority of the radical left was stripped bare, exposing a rotting, hollow core of political exploitation, systemic theft, and absolute disdain for the native citizens of the United States. Bang! The chairman's gavel struck the sound block with the definitive, bone-rattling finality of a judge's final ruling. The hearing was officially adjourned, but that single crack of wood was merely the detonation cord for the absolute inferno waiting outside the chamber doors. Inside, Ilhan Omar sat paralyzed in the suffocating silence of her own ruin. Outside, the media ecosystem was experiencing a Category 5 meltdown. Every major news network immediately interrupted their scheduled programming, painting millions of screens across the country with glaring, blood-red breaking news chyrons. The protective bubble of the progressive press didn't just pop, it was violently vaporized. Social media platforms descended into total chaos, with hashtags demanding immediate deportation completely hijacking the algorithms. Investigative journalists who, just yesterday, would have written glowing profiles about her bravery instantly smelled weakness in the water. Scrambling to save their own credibility, they began aggressively dissecting the leaked Department of Justice files overnight, transforming the left's untouchable political martyr into the undisputed fraud of the century. The public and political fallout was a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated voter outrage. American taxpayers, finally realizing the sheer scale to which they had been treated as an ATM for globalist actors, flooded Capitol switchboards, demanding accountability. And the Democratic Party, they executed their standard playbook. Whenever a liability becomes too toxic to carry, they amputated the infected limb. Party leadership instantly vanished from her defense. Elite mega-donors quietly and ruthlessly froze her campaign accounts, cutting off every single cent of funding to avoid the radioactive blast zone. In the span of a few hours, a political career built entirely on the weaponization of identity politics was officially dead and buried. But the political execution was just the opening act. The real nightmare was the cold, relentless machinery of the American legal system. Within an hour of the gavel strike, the Department of Justice's Denaturalization Section officially filed a sweeping, ironclad lawsuit in federal court. Warrants were executed with surgical precision. Her personal and campaign assets were frozen solid, locking her completely out of the financial system she had exploited. The formal, irreversible process of stripping her American citizenship was forcefully set into motion, replacing her arrogant dreams of a globalist future with the terrifying, highly probable reality of a life sentence behind federal bars. Meanwhile, on the steps of the Capitol, the atmosphere was electric. Vice President J.D. Vance pushed through the grand double doors into the blinding Washington sunlight, instantly engulfed by a roaring, jubilant crowd of supporters and a frantic swarm of reporters. He didn't gloat, And he didn't offer empty political platitudes. Stepping up to the bank of microphones, he projected the absolute, unshakable authority of a newly established order. I told you we were going to clean house, and that is exactly what the Department of Justice is doing, Vance announced, his voice booming over the cheers, delivering the hard numbers directly to the American people. I am proud to stand here and report the facts. In just 2 months, we have exposed tens of billions of dollars of defrauded taxpayer money. We have aggressively prosecuted numerous fraudsters, and we have stopped billions of suspicious payments dead in their tracks before they could leave our borders. The crowd erupted, but Vance raised a hand, his expression dead serious. This is what happens when you stop apologizing for putting America first, he continued, delivering the final crushing blow to the opposition-S ideology. You do not get to swear an oath to this republic while actively trying to tear it down. The era of the taxpayer funding their own destruction is permanently over. We have the evidence, we have the law, and we are taking our country back. The cameras pulled back, capturing the Capitol dome gleaming brilliantly against the clear afternoon sky. The scheme was over. The suffocating grip of divided loyalties, systemic theft, and political deception had been ripped out by the roots. It was a profound, undeniable picture of a nation waking up. Order, discipline, and the absolute integrity of the United States had been violently and gloriously restored, proving that when the truth is finally unleashed, the rule of law will always crush the lies into dust.